Good day, class. So I think we're already on lecture 7. So for a brief review, I think we talked about the owner's responsibilities last week. So we'll continue on other conditions on services. So lecture 7, we have here 7.1, the conditions for the architect's fee. So first is the architect's fee is based on the project construction cost. Where the architect has to render additional services, additional compensation shall be required. So this only means that your fee in the future will be based on the cost of the project. Then, uh, if ever that you're going to render services in addition to it, additional compensation will also be required. For other services that may be needed in order to complete the project, such as services of acoustic and illumination engineers, specialists, mural painters, sculptors, and other service providers are to be recommended by the architect for the owner's approval. Costs for these services are to be paid for separately by the owner and shall be subject to a coordination fee payable to the architect. Okay, so let's go to 7.3, scale models, 3D models, and walkthrough presentations. So I'll read. Should the scale model, 3D model, and or walkthrough presentation of the architect's design be necessary, they are to be recommended by the architect for the owner's approval. Costs for these services are to be paid for separately by the owner and shall be subject to a coordination fee payable to the architect. So I think guys, I don't know if you are aware of this, but mostly in the actual practice, 3D models or 3D animations usually um, those who practice in the industry, they already provide that to the owner, even though it is not required. So it would really depend on you. But it would be best if you're paid for that service because it takes a lot of time and effort to create 3D models, especially scale models. You know how hard it is to make those things. And we have here the per diem and traveling expenses. So a per diem plus traveling and living expense shall be chargeable to the owner whenever the architect or his authorized representative is required to perform services locality beyond 50 kilometers. So it's air, straight line, radial distance from the established office as it appears in the architect's letterhead. So if you have a project here in Cagayan, if you are, if you're based here in Cagayan de Oro, and then you have a project at Davao or in Cebu, and it's already more than 50 kilometers. So you're going to charge the client for per dime and uh, plus traveling and living expenses. So you have here extra sets of contract documents. So the owner shall pay the architect for additional cost sets of contract documents. Then if the architect renders additional professional services due to charges ordered by the owner. Then after if the architect renders additional professional services due to changes ordered by the owner after approval of the architect's output, the owner shall pay the architect for extra time, resources, drafting, or other office expenses. So I think it's only natural that if the the client requires you additional requires to render additional services, then he or she should pay you for those service. We have 7.7. So this is a clause on work suspended or abandoned. So if the work of the architect is abandoned or suspended in whole or in part, the owner shall pay the architect for the services rendered corresponding to the amount at the stage of suspension or abandonment of the work. The primary service of the architect is the preparation of the architectural plans, designs, specifications, and other building construction documents. These are sets of detailed instructions that shall serve as the basis for the general contractor to implement the project. Once the architect has prepared all these documents, the architect has completed the detailed design and contract documents phase of his service, which is equivalent to 90% of his work. When the owner therefore fails to implement the plans and documents for construction as prepared by the architect is entitled to receive as compensation the corresponding to 90% of the architect's fee. So, what's good about this clause, guys? This means that if you have already completed um, the design, the specifications, and all you need to do is for its implementation to happen, then you're already what you call this? You're already you should already be paid at least 90% already. So I think it's a good thing if we integrate this clause in the contracts that we're going to prepare for our clients. So if you're going to practice, guys, always make sure that you have a written agreement between you and your client in the near future. So we hear different periods of construction. So if portions of the building are erected at different periods of time, thus increasing the construction period and the architect's burden of services, charges pertaining to services rendered during the construction phase shall be adjusted proportionately. So when the suspension of construction exceed the period of 6 months, the fee for the remaining works shall be doubled. So this is a good clause, guys. Again, like what I've said before, don't forget to include that in your agreement with the owner. So services of specialist consultants. If the owner requires the services of specialist consultants, they shall be engaged with the consent of the architect. The cost of their services shall be paid for separately by the owner and shall not be deducted from the architect's fee. So if there are other specialist consultants which shall be engaged by the owner, it is important that the architect is always informed of those things because um, you are the one who prepared the plans and designs, so it would be best if you could integrate also the comments and suggestions of these specialists. Then if then the fees for the specialist should not be deducted from your professional fee as an architect. Okay. Then you hear separate services. Should the owner require the architect to design movable or fixed pieces of cabinets and other architectural interior elements, site development plan components, urban design elements, and other items of similar nature, the owner shall pay the architect in addition to the architect's fee. The compensation shall be based on the project construction cost as provided for the SPP document 203. So if there will be additional services, so it only means that you're going to be paid separately for them. So yeah, the example here for the architectural interiors, site development plan, and urban design elements. Then you have here the full-time construction supervision. So upon recommendation of the architect and with the approval of the owner, full-time construction supervisors, as well be deemed necessary, shall be engaged and paid by the owner. So if no project construction manager is present, the full-time construction supervisor shall be under the technical control and supervision of the architect and shall make periodic reports uh, to the architect regarding the progress and quality of the work done. So if you're hired as an architect, guys, it does not necessarily mean that you're going to do the full-time construction supervision. So there's a separate contract and agreement for that. So if you look at um, the previous clause, if you're already done with the design and the other contract documents, you should already be paid 90% of the work, whether the project will be implemented or not. So your professional fee as the architect, it does not include the full-time construction supervision. Okay. Then you have here the estimates. Any SPCC or any cost estimate submitted by the architect can attain only a certain degree of accuracy, as the architect has no control over the cost of labor and more materials or the manufacturers that go into competitive bidding. And he does not assume any professional responsibility for such cost estimates, unless glaring errors or discrepancies are clearly evident. So, as you know, guys, the prices right now in the construction industry, the prices for construction materials, it's quite volatile. If you're aware with the war, we have the war that no, the United States, no, the Ukraine is having with Russia. So I think it affects the cost of a lot of goods across the globe. So those are things that are beyond our control. So what the estimates that you prepare um, does not mean that it's going to be quite accurate because we are, after all, in a global economy. So there's only a certain level of accuracy that should be expected. But these things, guys, you should explain that well to the client so that they'll know also. When you have government taxes and services, the architect's fee is a net amount. Any tax, exclusive income tax, that the national and or local government may impose on the architect as a consequence of the services performed for the project shall be paid by the owner. So this is also important, guys, that you explain this to the owner, that the taxes shall be paid for by him as early as possible. Because if you don't inform the owner, that might cause issues later on. And you have the ownership of the documents. So all designs, drawings, models, specifications, and other contract documents and copies thereof prepared, duly signed, stamped, and sealed and furnished as instruments of service are in the intellectual property and documents of the architect, whether the work for which they were models executed or not, and are not to be reproduced or used on any other work except with the written agreement with the architect. So this is something, guys, that you should know, that although the owner owns the building, you still own the design. Then if the owner wants to build the design again in a different location, then he or she must inform you as the architect. Okay. Actually, we're protected by the intellectual property rights law. So it's our profession is well protected by law. The problem is just the implementation. Cost records. So during the progress of work, the owner shall furnish the architect a copy of the records of expenses being incurred in the construction. Upon completion of the project, the owner shall furnish the architect a copy of the summary of all costs of labor, services, materials, equipment, fixtures, and all items, and for the completion, and all items used at and for the completion of the construction. So I think the cost records are important if we're going to determine the final project cost, because if the final project cost is higher, then there's going to be adjustments for your fee also, because your fee as an architect is a percentage basis, as we have discussed in the previous weeks. So we're here the design and placement of signs. All signboards of the general contractor, subcontractors, jobbers, and dealers that shall be placed at the project site during the progress of construction shall be approved by the architect to size, design, and contents. After the completion of the project, the owner or his building lessee shall consult the architect for the design, size of all signboards, letterings, directories, and display boards that will be placed on the exterior of the public areas attached to the building project in order to safeguard the owner's interest. Nothing shall be installed inside or outside of the building that would compromise its safety and aesthetics. So it's really important that you inform the owner about these things, especially if you're doing commercial building, that if he's going to have signboards, he should also consult you guys, because sometimes what if the owner places something that may compromise the safety of the building, or it makes the building look ugly instead. So all your work to make the building as attractive and functional as possible goes to waste. So just to remind you guys to place these provisions in your future contracts with your future clients. Then project construction cost, as herein referred to, means the cost of the completed buildings to the owner, including the structure, plumbing, sanitary and electrical fixtures, mechanical equipment, elevators, escalators, air conditioning systems, fire protection systems, alarm and clock systems, communication and electronic systems, elements attached to the building, and all items in the plans, designs, drawings, and specifications prepared by the architect and his consultants. So the construction cost of other items planned and designed by the architect, such as architectural interiors, site development plan elements, and other items of similar nature, additionally planned, designed by the architect, are also part of the project construction cost. The costs of materials used and the labor and their installation are part of the PCC. If these items are furnished by the owner below its market cost, the cost of the material and labor shall nonetheless be computed on the basis of the current and fair market value cost. The PCC does not include any of the fees for the architect, the engineer, the specialized consultants, or the salaries of the construction inspectors. So we have here the project development cost. So project development costs shall include cost of the construction as well as all professional fees, permits, clearances, and utilities, and the cost of acquiring the site, lot cost of money, etc. So you should know, guys, how to differentiate the project construction cost and the project development cost, because there are tricky questions in the board exam related to these two terms. So take note of these two terms, guys. So I think this would conclude our lecture for this week. Next week we'll be looking at the specialized architectural services, which is in the chapter 3. So I think I'll post our activity, guys, for this week, and I'm sure you're already aware of your groupings. So if you have further questions or clarifications, you can just send a message at our group chat or our Padlet. So see you next meeting.